Hello, welcome everyone. And let's see, we should introduce ourselves first. I'm Scott Turansky. This is Joanne Miller. I'm married to Carrie, and Carrie and I have 5 children and 7 grandchildren now. I'm a pastor. Joanne and I head up the National Center for Biblical Parenting. I'll tell you about that more in a minute, but Joanne, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your family?
Sure. I'm Joanne Miller. My husband and I have 2 sons, and we now have 2 grandchildren. And I'm also a pediatric nurse. And it's good to be here to talk about anger today.
That's great. And we both homeschooled our children as they were growing up with our respective families. It was just a great experience to be working together as families too in our homeschooling experience. We head up the National Center for Biblical Parenting. It's an opportunity for you to connect with biblical resources for raising your children. The first class in any homeschool is parenting. So we want to equip you with that. And we know that you homeschool in part to develop character in your children. We will help you to do that. So we have over 150 presenters who teach our live parenting seminars around the country. We've trained over 300 biblical parenting coaches to work one-on-one to help families troubleshoot specific areas. We've got a lot to say about this area of parenting. And so we're eager to dive right in to this whole subject we're going to talk about today. You know, one of the biggest challenges that we experience, I think, as people are calling the office and asking questions has to do with emotional challenges. And so we want to share with you some specific ideas about dealing with those emotional challenges in your children. So as we do that, we want to help you to understand that emotions have a key role that we play in family life. We're going to talk about attitudes as they affect parenting. We're going to talk about all kinds of challenges that our children face. So let me take you to some different ideas as we introduce this subject about anger. Now, anger is this key emotion that we all experience in our lives. In fact, we need to have a plan for actually 3 emotions in our lives. One is this whole category of anxiety. Another is a whole category of disappointment. And the third is this whole category of anger. And we're going to zero in on the anger ones today. And as we do zero in on the anger, we're going to touch maybe on some other ones, but we're going to give you a specific plan that will help you to be able to address the challenges that you face in your children regarding anger. So let me throw up that slide again and we'll get started here. Helping children deal with anger is a challenge, but that's where we want to begin.
And certainly as we homeschool our children, we see anger. It's a common emotion, and certainly our children need to have some tools to deal with it. We can't avoid anger. It's part of who we are. In fact, even as parents, we struggle with anger. I'm sure you find that as you're working with your children, say things make you angry. We want to know how to manage those emotions. We can't just say anger is wrong. We need to deal with it. So we want to plan for anger in ourselves, and particularly this in this session, we're going to talk about anger in children.
And that brings us to our first point. You're already alluding to that.
Absolutely. We like to say that anger is good for identifying problems, but not good for solving them. We have anger. We want to know, why are we feeling angry? What is it identifying, either in ourselves or in someone else, that needs to be addressed?
Now, the reason we say that is because a biblical approach to anger doesn't say that anger is wrong all the time. It's always dangerous because it can damage relationships. But anger is this internal sense that something is wrong here and I need to do something about it. That's what anger communicates inside of our hearts. So we want to be able to separate those ideas. Something's wrong here, and I need to do something about it. When people use anger to solve problems, that's when relationships get damaged, people get hurt, bad things happen. But it's an identifier. It's something that says something's wrong, and we want to be able to address whatever that wrong thing is inside of a person so that they can either deal with it internally or externally, wherever the problem is, they can identify that problem.
So anger is not wrong, but it's dangerous. It can damage relationships. It can hurt people and things. If we use the anger, if we act out in the anger, it's there to identify what's wrong. And so in parenting, we can use anger as a flag. If we're getting angry as parents, something's wrong. What's wrong? Maybe it's in my own heart, or maybe my child is doing the wrong thing. They're not following instructions. They're having a bad attitude. They're having a poor response to correction. There's lots of things in parenting that make us angry, but also our children struggle with anger. So they need to learn to identify what's wrong. The anger itself needs to be dealt with. We can't just say, don't get angry or be more patient. That anger is pointing out a problem. Let's figure out what's wrong and how to respond more appropriately. See, I think this truth, even in and of itself, can free us up a little bit. We don't have to feel guilty about being angry, but we do need to know how to respond to it.
Now, when we talk about what's wrong out there, sometimes the wrong is out there because our child's being disobedient, and so we feel angry. But sometimes what's wrong is inside the heart. And let's talk about that with children, for example. Some children feel like they aren't getting what they want and they get angry. The problem happens to be inside of them, that their desires, which are good things, desires aren't bad that children have, but the desires can turn into expectations of how life ought to go. And those expectations can appear then demanding. And those demands then are what create the problem for children because they come on really strong and they have emotional outbursts. And so they feel overwhelmed because life isn't going the way I want it to. And they need a plan. Everyone needs a plan to deal with the internal struggles they face when it comes to anger. We want to deal with that a little bit more and show you what that looks like. But we first have to understand what's going on inside of the heart and what's happening. Just realize something's going wrong somewhere. And that's why the person's experiencing this anger.
And so we want to help our children have a plan to respond to that emotion when it's coming. And whether your child is young, 2, 3, 4 years old, or whether your child's a teenager, and certainly even into adulthood, we all need a plan to manage the emotions when they come on. Often, as we're teaching about helping children deal with anger, parents say, hey, I need this for myself. And it's true. In the family, we're all growing in anger management. So we want to have a plan. We can work on it together. But specifically, we want to teach children a plan so they know how to respond.
The plan. Now, I think we as parents need a plan to deal with our kids,
Yes.
but our children also need a plan. We're going to talk about both of those, I think, as we go through here to give you some ideas, some specific strategies and ideas. And to make it simple for children, this plan can apply to young children, 3, 4, and 5, or 14, 15, 16, whatever age they are. But let's try to make it simple for kids by just sharing some very specific things they can do. And you can help them do this. And the first one is to identify the cues.
Yeah, we're going to share with you a 3-step plan. Step number 1, identify the cues. We want to know that anger is coming on. What often happens is children erupt in anger. They respond with inappropriate responses. They didn't even know what's happening until they're angry. But as we start to work on anger in the family, we work on it with this child, we want to slow down the process and identify the early warning signs. When is that emotion beginning to build? We're starting to get a little frustrated. That's the point we want to identify it because we have more control over ourselves at that point. If the anger has already come over us, then we seem to have little control over the response. So let's identify some early warning signs, some cues that the emotion is building so we can teach children how to stop at that point.
Some children don't even realize what's going on inside of them. So these cues are biological cues. Think in terms of what your body feels so you can identify this. I start by saying to children, how can you tell when you're starting to get angry? Some children say, I have no idea. And when I counsel with children, their parents are always right there. Because I believe that parents are the best counselors for their children. They need to know what's going on in this session. So I say, let's ask Dad. Dad, how can you tell when you're starting to get angry? Sometimes Dad will say something like, my arm, one dad told me, my arm feels tingly and the hairs start raising on my arm. That doesn't happen to me, but that's what happened to this dad. I said, how can you tell Mom when you're starting to get angry? And she tells me my face gets flushed. And the little boy says to me, yeah, and my dad, I can tell when he's getting angry because his vein sticks out on his neck and gets big. And so we start talking about these physical representations of anger. If you can feel it coming on in your body somewhere, that's your cue. You can say to yourself, okay, I need to do something. It's coming on. I've got to make some decisions here before it gets out of control.
And of course, it takes a fair amount of self-awareness to identify the emotion building inside you. Children often have no idea of what we're talking about when we begin this, but sometimes we can identify signs of anger in another person that helps us. Just these conversations raise the awareness level of what emotion can do to your body. We sometimes use an activity in the office where we're showing a movie to the child and we give them the remote control to pause the movie when someone's starting to get angry. And we use an animated video so that, kids, they're probably familiar with the movie. We like to use Aladdin. But you can tell someone's starting to get angry. The child pauses the movie and then we say, oh, how could you tell that someone was getting angry? And then we can talk about facial expression, body posture, they're stomping around or their tone of voice. You can tell the emotion is coming by how they're acting. And then we can talk to the child about, do you ever feel that in your own self, when you're starting to get angry? So over time, as we begin to have these conversations, children can come up with some ideas of how they're starting to get angry.
Here's some things that some children have said to me. One is, I start feeling hot all over my body. One girl says, the heat starts coming from my feet and it goes all the way up into my face. A lot of times it's a heat in my face or my ears are getting hot. Those are signs that some people feel. One girl says, I feel like I've got to tear something in my head. She just, that's her feeling that she knows that she's starting to get angry. Sometimes children, their eyes get big or their voice gets louder. Those are biological cues that children have, and we want to help them identify those. And not only in themselves, but in other people. But we want to, if they can identify them in themselves, then they can catch this emotion that's starting to come on, and that's their indicator to do the next step. But they have to know where we're going here. They have to understand those cues as we're trying to move forward.
So step number one is to identify the cues. And I would suggest you want to spend some time with your child about this. Don't jump into other solutions until we start seeing this in family life. And maybe you see it in your child, some cues beginning to build. Now, sometimes parents say, my child goes from 0 to 60. There are no cues, but we begin to see them. Sometimes as parents, we can anticipate when the child is going to get angry because we're about to say no to them and we know the anger is coming on. But we want to look for maybe some cues in the child. It seems your voice is getting a little higher. Are you doing okay? And so we can help the child maybe to identify some of those cues.
Yeah, and James 1:19 says, be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. How can you be slow to get angry unless you can see it coming on? Identifying the cues helps us accomplish this particular step more effectively. So the child needs a plan to know when he or she is starting to get angry. Part of what we're doing here, notice, is we're transferring the responsibility to the child for their own anger to be able to manage it. Some children believe that their anger is everybody else's fault. And when we help them realize they are in control of their own anger, they can see it coming on, then they can actually do something about it. That's step number one.
Very important truth for children to identify that this is their problem. If they're getting angry, it's not to be blamed on someone else, but they need to manage it themselves. So step number one, identify the cues. And then we give them step number two is to stop. Very important step number two, no matter how intense the emotion is, if it's just beginning or if it's already controlling them, we always need to stop and pull back. This is where we learn to settle down. A child needs to learn to settle down before they can respond to that emotion.
I see a common pattern in some children that you want to watch out for. So if you see this cycle going on in your child, be aware that this is a critical problem that this child needs to address. It starts usually when you correct the child, and what does the child do? Deflect the problem, blame it on other people, other situations, so they don't take responsibility. And when they start blaming it on others, they start this victim mentality. That's the second part. There's this victim mentality which says, if everybody else would change, I would be fine. This isn't my problem. Then we have the entitlement mentality, which says you owe me, and then children get angry when you don't give them what they want. And that usually is followed by some form of comments like, that's not fair, or you don't understand me, kind of comments that block out any words that you might want to share with them. This causes a child to be rather negative in their responses to other people, resulting in a rather angry lifestyle. It's bad. This is a really bad pattern. You need to view it as a critical problem in a child's life. It's this kind of problem that leads children to grow into adults who have problems with paranoia. It helps, it contributes to this conspiracy theory idea that the whole world's against me, or the world's got a whole plan that all of that is contributed by this internal dialogue. So what we have is a cycle. We have this internal cycle, and all of these are on ramps that it's not fair, you don't understand me, keep me going in that cycle. What children need to do is stop. And so what you do as you're working with children is you're providing the off ramps off of that cycle. One of those is to help children take responsibility for themselves, to ask them the question, what did you do wrong when they're angry, or something like that helps them take responsibility for themselves, or to talk to them about the cues they have that are causing them to get angry inside or see their anger. That's transferring responsibility. What we're trying to do is help them slow it down. Another off ramp is this ability to stop. So stopping can help children pause not only their physical energy from blowing up, but it can pause the internal dialogue from getting worse. It might get worse temporarily as you have a child stop, because they're over there festering and getting upset about it, and they're just have this volcano going on. But after some time, the stop allows them to settle down, and you're able to get them off that cycle, that dangerous cycle inside.
Very important for children to learn to stop, and because that allows the emotion to settle. But it's not easy. We're going to do some training here. This is a step, it's a skill that's going to take some time to develop. But we want to coach our child through this learning to stop, to pull back. And as soon as they begin to get angry, as soon as they identify some cues that it's starting, that's the point we want the child to pull back. So if the child is just a little bit frustrated, they just need a small stop sign. That means, maybe they're putting together a puzzle and the piece isn't fitting and they're getting a little frustrated. Oh, they just need to sit back and stop and take a deep breath, and they can go on. They've settled down. But sometimes the child continues on, they're pressing on, they're working their math problem and it's just not working, and they see they made a mistake and now they have to erase it and the paper rips. They're getting really angry. At that point, they need to pull back, take a bigger stop sign, maybe a middle-sized stop sign, and walk around the room, to look out the window, get a drink of water, do something to break that build, let it settle down, and then they can settle down. But sometimes children, they press on, they keep going until they're really enraged. We define rage as anger now controlling you. When the emotion is controlling the person, you can't even think straight anymore. Now you're enraged. That child needs to take a break. They need to completely get out of the situation, settle down until that emotion is able to settle. So we say the size of the stop sign is determined by the intensity of the emotion. A little bit of frustration, that's our goal. Let's catch it at frustration level. Then we can just pull back and have a small stop. But no matter where we catch that emotion building, we want to pull back and settle down. You need that stop sign. And sometimes kids need a big stop sign for a while until they learn the process. But that stop is so important. No matter where we catch the emotion, we need to stop.
We'd encourage you to send a child to say, you need to settle down. You need to go take a break before we can go forward. One of the challenges here is that children don't want to take a break. And so they try to engage parents in dialogue. And it's very important for you as a parent to recognize that you're trying to get things done, but the child's off track. And if the child's off track and you're trying to get things done, you're not going to get anywhere because the child's off track. You have to stop what's going on, let the child settle down, and continue on. If you do try to keep getting things done when a child's off track, then, well, bad things are going to happen. Tension is going to be the product. I was working with one mom recently, 3-year-old little boy, and she was saying to the boy, you need to take a break. And he took his shoes off and threw them across the room. And she says, you need to go pick up those shoes. Well, what do you think is going to happen then? You think the boy's going to go pick up the shoes? No, he refuses. See, she's mixing the two different ideas here. She can't keep getting things done when the child's off track. She needs to say to the son, you need to take a break and settle down. And then when you're settled down, then we can go get the shoes, but we can't do it at the same time. Parents spend too much time trying to move forward when a child's off track, and that contributes to the child's inability to deal with what they're doing. See, the child who continues on, when the parent continues on, feels the sense of validation. I can be angry and continue getting things done. But if the parent says, oh, you're upset, we can't go forward, then you're taking away that validation. We're not going to continue to work. Children are learning that anger is a problem that's preventing us from moving forward. So the stop step is a crucial step in both the parent's plan in working with the child and the child's plan for dealing with their own anger.
Yes, you can just imagine, and maybe you see this in your home. If the child is getting angry and the parent's pressing on trying to get things done, then the parent begins to get angry and it just escalates and things get out of control pretty quickly. What we need to do is, even as parents, to recognize the next thing that happens, my child needs to take this stop. They need to pull back and settle down. And so we can't continue to engage with them until they've settled down. And as a parent, very important, I think sometimes we need some practice pulling back and settling down, and not engaging, not trying to press on. So a parent needs to step back even in that situation. And I think as parents, we want to model this break for our kids. We can't talk about this anymore until we all settle down. Model it. Sometimes as parents, we need to go take a break in our room, even if that's a safe situation to do that. But to model taking a break, it's a difficult skill for children to learn, but it's a life skill. They need to be able to stop, settle down, and pull back before they press on. So we can teach them, we can model it, we can practice it, and talk about it a lot in family life, so the children begin to learn to do that. It takes time. It's developing self-control. It's not something that comes just by knowing I need to stop, but actually the practice of stopping takes some practice.
I think we've shared enough about this to go on in our presentation here, but I find that this one skill of stopping is a very strategic tool. And when I'm working with my clients in the biblical parenting coaching program, it's an 8-week program where we're taking parents strategically through life skills in children's lives that'll help them deal with emotions and other problems. We find that there's a very specific set of therapy sessions or techniques that you can work on with your child. So you're practicing this at home. So I will share more at the end about a resource that you can use in order to help you with that particular set of tools that you're going to need. Proverbs 29:11 says this: a fool gives full vent to his anger, but a wise man keeps himself under control. And we want to help children look at that, see what that looks like, and be able to develop the ability to pull back on their own, to stop and settle down before they can move forward. That's a life skill that they need now, and it'll carry them well into the future.
I really love this verse because it just addresses the issue of, do we need to vent the anger? Do we need to let it out? So we're not talking about just stuffing it. We need to deal with it, but that doesn't mean we need to vent it. I mean, if the child is taught when you get angry to punch a pillow or go out in the backyard and yell, or if they're taught they can vent their anger in that way, then as they get older, they continue to vent and can cause real damage. So what we want to do is teach children venting is not the answer, but we are going to deal with it. But you can't deal with it until you stop and settle down. Then we can go back and deal with the problem. Because remember, we said anger is good for identifying problems, not good for solving them. There's still a problem out there, but we can't solve it with our anger. We need to settle down first, and then we can solve it. And that, of course, brings us to step number 3, to choose a different response. We can't just tell children what not to do. We have to tell them what they can do instead. So we're going to rehearse what are some different things you can do when you've got a problem. Children need problem solving skills. Anger is not one of them, though. Let's choose a different response.
Again, here, I want you to see the importance of training children. And so this whole process is a correction process of having a child stop and settle down. But that in itself is training a child to be able to deal with their challenges. So teaching a child to pull back in step number 2, and or identify the cues is step number 1. And then also to be able to stop, that's a tool that they're going to use. And then thirdly here is they need a plan. They need to plan a better response. Sometimes they're going to talk about it with the other person, and they're going to, because that's confronting. You need to be able to say, I don't like that, or talk about it in a way that sets limits on another person with your words. So talking about it is one of the solutions.
And certainly our children need to develop ways to talk about problems. And siblings, that's a great place to learn it. In your home, children have conflict with each other. They're unhappy with the way things are going. They need to learn to talk about it. As parents, we want to teach children how to resolve conflict with their words, how to address how they're feeling, how to confront another person without anger, how to work it out. And so often we'll tell children, try and work it out. But if you can't work it out, come see me and I will help you to solve this problem with your brother. So we want children to know they have someone they can go to. And I guess that's our second choice, is to get help. If your brother's not listening to you when you're using your words, you can come and get me and I will help you. Children need to know that getting help is a good solution to their problem that they're experiencing. If you can't solve it yourself, come get help. And that's an adult skill, I think. Even as parents, we need to know that help's available. If we're having a problem and we're not getting anywhere with another person or with a situation, there's help available, whether it be financial counseling, marriage counseling, whatever it is, help's available, but we need to be courageous enough to ask for help.
That's good. So we've already talked about the first one is to talk about it. The second one is to get help. Another idea we can give to children is to slow down and persevere.
That often works with schoolwork. You just got to get it done. So stop rushing, stop trying to get it over with, and let's just slow down and persevere.
Ignoring the problem is another one that sometimes children need to develop more tolerance of another person's irritation. So those become solutions that children can use.
And so after the child has settled down, we can have them choose a different response. Maybe we have to do some brainstorming. Maybe your child has already exploded in anger. They've had a problem. They've had to take a break. They're coming back. We're talking about it. Now we can talk about, well, how could you have solved that problem differently? Let's talk about it. So the child is better prepared for next time.
All right. So what we've done so far is we've laid out for you a plan for dealing with frustration, anger. Let's just talk about that for a moment. Frustration, anger is that kind of anger that we experience that comes from the various challenges that we have. A blocked goal or a violated right or something along that line. And when that takes place, then people experience frustration. And so the plan we've talked about so far really addresses frustration. It's a very important part of anger. Anger is a bucket of, challenges, emotions that we have, and frustration is important.
But frustration, anger is not the only kind of anger out there. Sometimes we experience hurt anger, and our children can feel hurt. And that, again, makes a person angry. And we're going to deal with hurt anger a little differently than frustration anger, because it's a little bit deeply rooted and can create real problems in a person, lifestyle problems, if it's not dealt with properly.
And that hurt isn't always because of some big thing in the past. Sometimes a child has this perception. You really, as a parent, didn't do anything wrong. All you said was to your daughter, no, you can't go to that party on Friday night. And I can't believe I live in the strictest family in the world. Nobody does that for their children. Doesn't let them go to the party, and they experience this internal hurt. So whether it's a real or perceived hurt, it goes through the heart in the same way. And so we have to have a plan in our own lives to deal with hurt, and our children need a plan to deal with the hurt that they experience in their lives. It's just going to be very important. Everybody needs a plan for dealing with anger, and anger has different parts to it. So dealing with hurt anger is going to be strategic.
So we're going to coach our children how to respond to hurt in their lives, because we find that some children, and even adults, respond to hurt poorly. They react to that hurt and they lash out at other people, and it takes them down a path that's unhelpful.
And I would just suggest, before we even talk about the plan here, just understanding comfort with a child is very important. It's probably one of the greatest gifts you can give to a child, is to comfort that child. Children need comfort. Don't forget the importance of that as you're working with a child. But let's talk about how this cycle develops in a child's life, because they experience hurt, and you can see it because they have this angry response. That's only one of the choices now when it comes to hurt, is anger. We'll come to another choice in a minute, but anger looks like this. I've experienced some form of injustice. Injustice is, that's not fair. And when you hear a child saying that's not fair, they're starting to enter into this cycle that's going to do damage to their own hearts. And they say, I'm going to get revenge. And so, some children they come back with this meanness that they have, either towards someone else or even toward you as a parent. They just want to get revenge and mistreat you in some kind of a way. And what that does, it fosters inside of a child's heart the sense of bitterness. You'll know when a person is experiencing bitterness when the situation that they're experiencing is difficult, but their anger response is greater than what the situation warrants. Or their anger is more prevalent. They're more often getting angry. It's just a sign of bitterness growing in a person's heart, turning them into a person who is unhappy. It's an unhappy lifestyle that a person has. That's the path that starts to develop inside of this person, often coming from their perceived hurt or real hurt inside of their lives.
And you can see this becomes a cycle. A person who chooses this path in life, this response to hurt, can get stuck in this cycle, and they just stay there, and they're constantly angry. Every little nudge in this hurt department pushes them further into their desire for revenge, their bitterness. They just seem to be always angry. In fact, maybe you know an older person like this who's angry all the time. All they can talk about is how unfair things are, and they're always angry about something. Someone has hurt them. They just stuck in this cycle. It's a very unhelpful place to be.
I'll tell you why people stay in this upper cycle. Here's what they say to themselves. They say, I'm right. Well, first, let's say angry people are unhappy people. That's a very important point. But here's why they say, I'm right, is they say, I am right. And they are right, probably, that the other person did hurt them. There's no doubt. Yes, you're right. You're right. But if you keep holding on to that, then that does something to you that's really not helpful too. Because it's not good enough to be right. You also need to be wise. And it's unwise to hold on to this anger, because an angry person is an unhappy person. And we want to help children recognize what that looks like so that they can begin to make changes. Otherwise, it's going to turn into a lifestyle issue. It's going to be a real problem for them as they try to move forward.
But there's another choice. We don't have to respond to hurt with anger. There's another choice. Just imagine two little boys running down the street. They both fall down. They both skin their knees. One little boy is angry. He gets up. He starts hitting mom. I don't know why he's hitting her. She's not part of the problem, but he is just lashing out. That's his response to the hurt. The other little boy runs to mom for comfort. He wants to be held. He's crying, needs comfort. He knows he needs comfort. That's what he's desiring. He wants to curl up in mom's lap and feel better. It's a much healthier response to hurt when we seek out comfort, when we respond with sorrow, the sadness. It takes us on a very different path in life.
All right, let me take you through this cycle. This is a more helpful cycle, a more healthy cycle in a child's life if they respond with sorrow instead of anger. That child, little 5-year-old who comes crying to mom, sometimes we say, stop crying, grow up. I want to suggest that sorrow is much more productive in a person's life than anger. Sorrow tends to open the heart, where anger tends to close the heart. So we not only want our children to experience sorrow, but as we see them experiencing that sorrow, we want to comfort them. Just such an important dynamic in a child's life. Come here, let me hold you. Even when a child's angry, sometimes we can say, okay, I can see you're getting upset. Come over here, let me comfort you. But here we're talking about this pattern inside of a person's heart that can help them to be more emotionally healthy. So when they're hurt and they start feeling sad about that, that's a normal, healthy response. And they need to experience comfort in the midst of that. And what that does, it turns something inside on for them. I use the word gentle here, but you know how it is when you're comforted, you go, that's what I really mean here. It makes this kind of softness take place inside the person. And that results really in a person having a ministry with other people. You see, when you recognize that someone else is hurting and you've experienced that kind of pain, then you can often turn that around and help others. In fact, when someone is being bullied and we try to help them get through that bullying situation, we get out of it and we say, you know how it feels to be bullied? People need kindness. And you can be the person who can come alongside of other people who are being mistreated, and you can help them because you understand what it feels like. There's this ministry that takes place. In fact, I would suggest that all the hurts from our past are really doors for ministry in our lives to go forward and help other people, to be able to care for other people, maybe in the same area, or maybe it's not even in the same area. Maybe it's in a completely different area. And what we're doing is we're coming alongside people and we're just encouraging, we're just being caring to them. And that caring is what brings this solution inside of our hearts that we can pass on to others. And of course, when you do that, that makes you a more happy person. in contrast to the anger, what makes you unhappy, the person who responds with sorrow and experiences ministry and so on, it just brings this internal joy and sensitivity inside of the heart. So that's what we're trying to help children understand.
We're going to help children to respond with that. And as parents, we want to respond with empathy, with compassion. When a child's been hurt, I think sometimes our tendency may be, well, if you had listened to me, this would have happened to you. But really, we want to start out by offering compassion, offering some empathy, and then help children know that it's a healthy response to be sad. That's okay to be sad, and that God can use that hurt in your life to help you care for other people as well. So we want to know how to respond to our children when they're hurt. We encourage that sadness response because it really takes us on a very different path, a much healthier path in life. The sadness opens up the heart, allows us to connect with other people emotionally. When we learn that sadness response, it really takes us on a different path.
Let me share you a passage of scripture that we got this from. We try to be biblical in all the things that we do. And this passage is the one in Second Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3-5. In fact, let me just read it to you. I want you to look at it with me. It says, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion." Let's stop there for a moment. Fathers. You want to look at that, and mothers too, but fathers tend to be, tough, don't cry, be a man kind of thing, which has some benefit. But there's this sense in which God is the Father of compassion for us and the God of all comfort. I want to be like God. I want to be a father who's compassionate and comfort other people, who comforts us in our troubles so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. It's ministry. In other words, we take the pain that we've experienced when we've experienced trouble in our lives. That's what it says, comforts us in all our troubles. When we experience those troubles, God comforts us. We receive that comfort from him. Then we can pass it on. And as parents, of course, we're trying to demonstrate the same kind of comfort with our children to emulate God's way of treating us. So it just becomes this different cycle. Children need this. I know that's hard for some of you. Just as you look at your child, you go, well, I'd like to comfort him, but he doesn't want to be comforted. He's an angry kid. So I think we ought to go probably and share some practical ideas about dealing with somebody who's angry.
Absolutely. How do we move a child from that top cycle down to the bottom cycle? How do we teach them to respond differently? And we've got some ideas for you.
Yeah, let us share with some ideas that may be helpful. I would suggest that one of the things we want to do with someone who's caught in these cycles, either the cycle I mentioned earlier, the victim mentality cycle, or the cycle we showed here, they're caught in this internal cycle. And sometimes teaching about anger can help them as an off ramp. They can realize that what they're doing to themselves is dangerous. And a lot of the things in this session can be helpful for you. That anger is good for identifying problems, but not good for solving them. That you can see the anger coming on inside of you as a biological experience. That you're responsible for your own anger and you need to take responsibility for it and not blame it on other people. That there is a cycle that goes upwards that's negative that can damage you. All these things we've talked about today can be teaching points for you as you're talking with your child. The teaching often allows a child to understand more about what they're experiencing so they don't immediately go into their negative thinking that's creating this difficult problem.
Another way we can help a child move from that top cycle down to the bottom is with firmness, to not allow them to act out when they get angry. Sometimes we feel sorry for the child and we realize that life is difficult. If they've been hurt, maybe this is a significant hurt in their life. Maybe it's an illness that they have to put up with, a chronic illness or an injury, or maybe it's a divorce, some kind of emotional hurt has happened to them. We feel sorry for the child. Life shouldn't be this way. They shouldn't have to deal with this. And so we kind of let them act out because of that sense that shouldn't be this way. Or we don't require them to do their chores because what they have to deal with in their life physically. But I think we make a mistake when we make those kind of excuses for a child. It reinforces that top cycle that life is unfair. It shouldn't be this way. And really, the child who has a difficult life needs to deal with that difficult life. They need character. Firmness builds character. And so we're going to be empathetic, but we're going to be firm as well. not allowing them to act out, but saying, yes, you do need to take this medication without acting out. Yes, you do need to do your chores, even though it's difficult for you. You do need to respond with kindness to others, even though you're hurt. So that firmness is very important for the child's life to build the character they need to be able to manage the life that they've been given. We wouldn't have chosen for the child if they've experienced this hurt. It's unfortunate, but they still need the character to deal with it.
See, some children pursue pleasure in their life. Let me get on the video game. Let me read my book. Let me play with my friends. And their pursuit of pleasure is dangerous because pleasure, the pursuit of pleasure, not pleasure itself, but the pursuit of pleasure leads to addiction in a person. They keep craving pleasure and they keep going after it. They become addicted to pleasurable things, and that's dangerous. Pleasure is a byproduct. You can't pursue pleasure. Yet some parents have the misunderstanding that they think their job in life is to make their child happy, to build their self-esteem or something like that. That's really dangerous. I would encourage you to view childhood and young people in their stages of adolescence as this time where they're developing the life skills necessary to move forward, to be able to function well in adulthood. And that's going to require firmness. Children need firmness to build character. It will help them to do what they need to do. So don't hesitate to put pressure on your children with a plan to help them to be able to deal with their anger. I was with a mom one of my coaches that I'm training right now said that in their school, they have an angry child and they've told this child, oh, we don't want you to be angry. So if you get angry, you can just go over to this place where you can do something else until you're ready to come back or something. But this child doesn't. He just paces around the room in the classroom because he's fuming with anger, and they don't really require anything of him. They're trying to appease his anger because he has like this special need of anger. I would just suggest our children have a special need of anger that needs some firmness that's going to help them make some changes. So very important quality here, firmness.
So keep an eye out for that child who needs some firmness in their life to manage themselves. Yes, you need to take a break. Yes, you need to settle down, and then we can come back. We're going to offer compassion and some empathy, but you also need to settle down.
In that empathy idea, we also want to think about listening, because when you listen to a child, sometimes they just need to talk. And so non-critical listening might be helpful. I'll just tell you one story. My daughter, when she was about 14 years old, her name's Megan, she came down to my office in my home and she proceeded to tell me something I had done wrong. I'm not even exactly sure what it was. But I then explained why I did what I did. And she said, fine, you never listen to me anyway, and slammed my door and went upstairs. And I go to myself, I say, well, I didn't handle that the best way. And so I went up and knocked on her door because we allow do-overs in our home. I knocked on her door, had my yellow pad in my hand, and I said to her, could I have a do-over? I don't think I handled myself well down there. I'd like to listen to you and what you have to say. Now, I had determined that I would go in and listen to her until she said she was done talking, and I would not answer any of her complaints or anything. So I took my yellow pad and I started writing down. I sat on her bed and she said, well, you always, and so I said, okay, so you're saying I always do this and you never. And so, okay, so I never do this. And I just kept writing and writing. So you're saying I do this and I don't do this, and you don't like it when I do this, and you think this is unfair. I just wrote it all down. I didn't argue with any of those things, didn't raise my eyebrows. I didn't do anything. I just took notes and wrote it all down. And I was determined to stay in there with her until she said she was done. It took about 10 minutes of her lecturing me with all this whole list of things, and I wrote them all down. And she finally said, okay, I'm done. I said, okay, thank you. And I got up to leave, to walk out of her room. And she said, wait a minute, aren't you going to respond to any of that? And I said, well, that's what got me in trouble before. I just wanted to listen to you. And she says, fine, I'll listen. I said, okay. Let me just take one thing here. And I didn't deal with the whole list. That would have been overwhelming. But I took one thing and I started talking. And I was surprised how responsive she was. She was listening to me. I learned that you earn the right to speak by listening. And that took place on that day. I just think sometimes our children are really angry, and sometimes their ability to talk about it helps them to get through it in a more productive way.
Listening is helpful. And a fourth way to move a child from that top cycle down to the bottom is by modeling it. The reality is, when a child is hurt and they're angry, They lash out at us and they hurt us. And we can lash back because we're feeling hurt. And the reality is that just escalates. And so, what we want to do is model a sadness response. You know, it hurts me when you say those things. It damages our relationship. I need to go spend some time and settle down myself. Modeling a softer response, the sadness that they're damaging our relationship can be helpful just so the child sees, yeah, this is, I'm not going to lash back out in anger, but I'm going to pull back and settle down. And then a child can learn that from our modeling as well.
You know, sometimes we go to we do parenting seminars at churches all the time, live parenting seminars, and we'll have someone come up afterwards when we're talking about anger or something like this, and they'll say, "Oh, I never knew all of these things. Oh, is it too late for my kid?" And I'll say, "How old are your kids?" 6 and 7. I'm going, no, it's not too late. We've got plenty of opportunity. There's some people who say you got to help your kids by the time they're 12 to develop a value system, because then they enter the teen years. And I'm going, and they're saying like, is it, if you don't do that, what happens? Is it too late? And we have a message for you that's really important. You need to understand there's always hope. It's never too late. And here's why. We believe in a God who changes people at 6 or 7 years old, changes people at 12 and 13 years old, changes people who are adults. God is always changing people. And where does he work? He works in the heart of a person. That's why a heart-based approach is so important for parenting. I encourage you to dig in, work hard, understand anger a little bit more so that you can do some teaching. Often as we're working in the coaching program with parents and the one-on-one program, a parent will say this, that I need this stuff for myself, not just for my child. And that is true. We all need this in our own lives. These are adult skills that we're talking about here. We're just teaching them to children on in a developmental stage that's appropriate for their age and their development. But it's important for all of us. And that's why the coaching program or the teaching we're doing here work, because we're not just sharing with little solutions that kids are going to grow out of, like count to 10 or something. We're teaching them solutions they're going to use for the rest of their lives. We're talking about what's going on inside of your heart and what's going to happen there. We want children to understand that there are solutions. We don't want a child to just feel like they're stuck where they are. We want them to be able to move forward, and we're the parents. And so we're coming in with solutions, with hope, and hope is often attached to a plan, giving them perspective. Let's try to move forward. It's important to realize that some kids just feel discouraged. They just see life the way it is now, and they need to be able to see much more about that. We have a lot of solutions for you at the National Center for Biblical Parenting. Let me just tell you about a few of those. Here's a couple websites you might jot down. Biblicalparenting.org is our big website. We have 4 major websites that we have, but this is one that you can get to everything from there, and I'll link you to the other websites. But biblicalparenting.org has hundreds of pages of resources for you. We've written 15 books on parenting. We've taught all over the country. We got all kinds of recordings and teachings available at biblicalparenting.org. And at biblicalparenting.coach, you can learn more about the coaching program so that you can get specific plans for your child. We'll have a coach walk alongside of you, and we'll tailor a specific plan for your child. We've also packaged a plan or some resources for you, and you can find them at biblicalparenting.org/parenting power pack. When you go there, you'll see some resources that we use in the coaching program to help children in depth. I mentioned earlier about having a child stop. There's several things needed in order to help children with that. I talked about the cycle of victim mentality and that's not fair and you don't understand me, all of those kinds of things. You need off ramps off of that. And so if you have a child stuck in those, you're going to find those solutions here in that parenting power pack. It's all downloadable. We're giving you 2 full books in ebook format, 20 audio sessions you can listen to Joanne and me teaching. You've got specific material in there on anger and how to address anger with children specifically. So I encourage you to go visit that, see what's available there so you can learn more about us, about the National Center for Biblical Parenting. I encourage you to stay in touch with us. If you need help with personalized coaching, you'll see the link at that site as well, at Parenting Power Pack. And we'd love for you to sign up for our free email parenting tips. We offer them. They go out about once a week. And we share some very meaty information tying your scriptures and your faith to your parenting in ways that will change your family. So we encourage you to work hard with your children. It's a hard time sometimes working with kids who have specific challenges. The work you do now will pay off greatly, not only for now, but for the future. May God richly bless you as you continue to work on your family.